Welcome, everybody. Welcome to another installment of Effective Small Groups Zoom Friday. That's right. Woohoo! Today we have Rick Lawrence with us, and I've known Rick. My goodness, how long have we gone back? It's been quite
easily 20 years.
Easily 20 years. You know, Rick was. I almost said smart enough, but I think it was probably brave enough to take on one of my first articles back in the day. I still remember my first article for Group, by the way. It was back in I think it was 1990. I wrote an article called "You're Fired" because I had just gotten fired from my youth ministry. And it was like, oh, what do I do about this? So I wrote, because that's what writers do. They write out of their pain. I wrote this article called "You're Fired," and it resonated. You know, first of all, you printed it, and I got a little bit of money out of it. But the cool part was the response. People actually responded to it.
Well, those of you who've been in ministry for more than, let's say, 7 or 8 years, the prospect of getting fired is not rhetorical. Stuff happens in churches. Go figure. So yeah, it's kind of universal.
Yeah. Well, let me introduce you again. Thank you guys for everything. And again, I want to say welcome to this conversation with Rick Lawrence. Rick was the editor of Group Magazine. My goodness, probably for 20 years as well, right?
33.
33. All right. So it was.
I know you're shocked because I look much younger than that. Those two things don't compute.
Yeah.
So yeah, 33 years. Yeah.
But the thing about being an editor of Group Magazine and really a voice to the youth ministry world and the culture is that he was pretty much on the edge of everything that was going on. And I really have a great respect for him and just his leadership of youth ministers and youth ministries throughout the years. And I want to just say thank you, Rick, for that. Last year, July 1st, he took a new position as the executive director at Vibrant Faith. So Rick, why don't you tell us a little bit about Vibrant Faith and anything else I may have missed?
Sure.
I know you have family too. You're welcome to share about that.
Yeah, so Group got hammered by, like everything else in the world, by the pandemic, especially in the children's ministry world that Group is in. That a lot of Group's revenue comes from Vacation Bible School, which they had the most popular in the world. And when there was no Vacation Bible School last summer, that just hammered the organization. And we eked along for a little while with a PPP loan, but then mid-year they cut half the staff. Yeah. So myself and many others that have been there a long time left. And it's, one of those, what Jesus does is he takes ugly things and makes them beautiful. For me, that's an essential way to describe the movement of Jesus. He takes ugly things and makes them beautiful. And he took that ugly thing and made it beautiful for me. It was like a 3 or 4 month process of interviews and being vetted with a bunch of other people. And I ended up getting the executive director position with Vibrant Faith. It's a kind of an iconic but small ministry resourcing organization. It's not based anywhere. Our whole staff is virtual and has been for a long time. So we have people in 6 different states. And it was started by Merton Strawman, who is a giant in the world of religious research. In fact, he kind of kicked off the category of research in the religious realm. Even before Gallup and so forth, there was Merton Strawman. And he started an organization called Search Institute, which is still going on today. Their background is in giving church leaders and churches high quality research. Out of that spun a thing called the Youth and Family Institute, which later became Vibrant Faith. So the focus has always been on children, youth, and adult ministry, but mostly children and youth. And the organization provides resources, training in the form of online masterclasses and coaching. And we have a coaching school. People pay to come to our coaching school, which is ICF certified. And it's a kind of a world-class coaching school for people who want to be ministry coaches. So we do all that, plus we do large-scale research. So we're right now working 2 multi-million-dollar Lilly Foundation grants. One about calling. How do you discover your calling as a person and then live it out? And the other one's called Thriving Congregations. So we do a lot of kind of world-class research as well that feeds into the things that we do in our training, our blog pieces, and our coaching community. So there you have it. So in addition to that, I'm an author. I'm a general editor of the Jesus Centered Bible. I wrote a book called Jesus Centered Youth Ministry, and then wrote a follow-up to that called The Jesus Centered Life, which kicked off a bunch of Jesus centered resources. So I just came out last October with a daily devotional called the Jesus Centered Daily. So I do a lot of authoring. That's my other job. That's my passion job in the fringes of my life. And I hosted a podcast called Paying Ridiculous Attention to Jesus. So it's in its 6th year now. So I'm kind of in love with Jesus. So there.
Well, that's first of all, I know your works, and if you haven't picked up Jesus Centered Youth Ministry, it's really a great resource in youth work out there and such. So thank you again for that. Hey, Rick, now you're involved. Let's just get right to it. We're talking group ministry here, and we've got some particular things we want to look at this hour. Oh, there it is.
Look, that's the early version, Trev. You need to get the revised version. So much better.
It's got an autograph in it.
Yeah, I totally rewrote that about 5 years after it came out, because I've been practicing it with groups. And I had somebody challenge me and say, you just need to rewrite the whole book now that you've been, doing this for 5 years. So yeah, there's a revised version. So there you have it.
Very cool. Yeah. Oh, well, I guess I still have my old version then too, because that's the one I have.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you have been doing groups for a while. In fact, tell us a little bit about your experience with groups. And I love hearing what you do with youth. You've got a youth group type or a teen group that you do, and that's yeah. Just tell us about those.
So we have I call it a home-based ministry. It has over the course of these 7 years, it's had all the way from middle schoolers to post-college students. They're young people from 6 or 7 different schools, 5 or 6 different churches. It's an amalgam. The group started sort of accidentally. My daughter was involved in a school shooting in her high school, and in the slipstream of that, the trauma of that, she and others in this larger community who've been affected by school shootings and suicides and everything else, they were going to their normal youth ministry at their church, and all of them were having kind of a shared experience of feeling like what they were encountering in their normal youth group wasn't scratching the itch that they had deep inside coming out of these traumatic experiences. They didn't want in-depth counseling. Everything seemed shallow to them that they were getting in their normal youth ministry in their church coming out of this. So they started, talking about, well, what else could we do? And my wife started saying, Rick, I was doing this Jesus-centered youth ministry strategy all over the country with people. But she said, why don't we start a group in our home? I said, I don't have the bandwidth for that. And she said, okay, well, if you don't start it, I will, which is it's a wife's trump card. And I said, okay. So we started something small. It was very, just kids inviting their friends. And it was pretty small at the start. 7 years ago, it's like 6 or 7 kids. And we did it for a summer, and we said, we're not going to compete with church youth ministries. So we stopped at the end of the summer. So we did that for the first summer. And then the next year, when we were getting ready to stop, I said, remember, we're not going to meet starting after next week. And one of the kids said, why is that again? And I said, it's because you're all involved in your church youth ministry, and I won't compete with those. They're not doing stuff during the summer, a lot of them. And so that we can fill that space. And I know how overloaded you guys are already, and I don't want you to feel torn or any of that. And she raised her hand again and said, but isn't that decision up to us? And I just didn't know what to say. I was like, okay, I just don't want you decommitting from your church youth ministry. And she's like, okay. So that started an every week experience that we've been doing for 7 years now. And it grew to about 30 kids. So we do it behind the window that you see behind me every Tuesday night. And the difference with this is that it's my little laboratory experiment for pushing the envelope on how to engage young people. So it's highly interactive, highly experiential. It is not me talking. It's not me producing just questions that little groups get together and they go through the questions. It's giving over the responsibility for discovering and pursuing truth to the kids. So we use experiences, video prompts, meaning storytelling on video, and stuff I capture off of YouTube, and little chunks of The Chosen, and you name it. We use all kinds of stuff that's visually based. Sorry, let me turn my phone off here.
A reminder,
Fish it out of my pocket. Yeah.
Probably to all of us to do that. Yeah.
Yeah. We use highly interactive methods of engaging so that they're talking, pursuing, and discovering things on their own. Then they feedback to the whole group. I interact with what they're feeding back. I use a whiteboard to write everything they say on the whiteboard. I discovered accidentally that when people, youth or adults, see their words show up on your whiteboard, they feel heard. And it's a profound experience for them. So I learned this about 15 or 20 years ago, and I never do anything with a group where I'm not recording their voices on something. It also helps me to interact with what's happening and to pluck out threads in the conversation as people are throwing stuff out there. It helps people not to reiterate what's already been said because they can see it up there on the whiteboard. So it's a way of honoring the voices of young people. And turns out that in this generation, Gen Z, one of their highest values is having their voice valued. And the church is the one place that they go to in their whole cultural experience where when they show up, their experience is that their voice doesn't matter very much once they get to church. They go and they listen to someone else talk for the most part when they go to church. That doesn't fit their mentality or the way they're wired. And they're voting on that with their feet. So in the last 5 years, 1/4 of teenagers have left the church in the last 5 years. I think that's a prophetic statement. I think it's not a negative. It is, but it's not a negative in the way we normally see it. If we pay attention to what's happening there, they're trying to say the way that we are being engaged needs to change. So what I do in our group is my little laboratory to just take risks, lots and lots of risks in highly engaging them. And I do the same thing that I'm doing with the young people with groups of adults. I don't change anything in between the two groups. They both pursue and discover and interact with exactly the same things. What I've discovered is that this won't be a surprise to all of you, but adults have been so conditioned into church culture that only the person standing up front really knows the answer to anything. And so adults are very hard to get them to relax, loosen up, and start participating and throwing out what they're discovering. Kids are different. Once they assess that the environment is safe and my voice matters, they jump in. We've had kids, usually when visitors come, it's like going into a wind tunnel for them because it is highly conversational. Like there is a lot of stuff happening in this group. And so young people coming in for the first time, they haven't experienced that before, and they can look like their hair's blown back. But some of them like, I love this. and they just keep coming back, and they get used to it, and they finally allow themselves to start speaking up too. And I do this, I seed it by, they're always in pairs, trios, or foursomes, multiple times through the evening. So there's no option. You have to talk at some point, no matter how introverted or shy you are, you end up having to talk. And that helps everyone learn how to participate. And I guess the last thing I'll say is that one of the things we value in this group, and it can only happen in a group where people feel safe, is we value pushing back on other people's stuff that they're saying. So you'll hear, if you came to our group on Tuesday night, you would hear someone say, I don't know if I agree with that. It's not me saying it, it's the young people saying it. I don't know if I agree with that. What do you mean? And they'll push back, and there might be a pushback to the pushback. But that's one of our ethics, is that we're in a community where it's okay to push back with each other or question what you just said, because we're all discovering together. It's not the leader's responsibility solely. Now, I construct the night, I construct what's going to happen when, but it's built around the expectation that improvisational moments are going to happen. So in order for us to you feel relaxed about that, you have to have a structure. We're going to do this, and here's the progression of that. But underneath that is all of this space for improvisation, stuff I don't know is going to happen. So I know I've asked a really good question when I legitimately don't know the answer to it when I'm asking it. That is, for me, it's a test of my own dependence on Jesus and my willingness to risk, is to ask questions I don't already know the answer to, and then to interact with what kids are coming up with as they grapple with that. So I've heard some of the most amazing theology I have ever heard coming out of the mouths of kids who don't even know that they're expressing theology when they're saying it. I've just heard the most remarkable things. You know, why did Jesus curse the fig tree? That's a strange story. Why did he wither the fig tree with a word? Well, we just jump over that story. When kids are prompted to discover and think and figure out what they think might be happening there, you hear the most amazing things. So that's a little picture of what I've been doing. And again, I do the same thing with adults. It's just a lot harder with adults.
Let me kind of, can I kick back, or
whatever you want?
Let me, how'd you say?
Pushback.
Pushback. There we go. Here's the problem that I run into, and this is a great, because we're talking about obstacles this week. What do we do with problem people and so
yeah.
Here's a little pushback to that, because I love that. I mean, that's great. But what I run into with my groups is what I hear is a general pooled ignorance that can happen, where, you know, nobody really knows the answer. And if I don't know the answer, then, you know, and some of the stuff that just, it gets very, like I said, just a pooling of ignorance. And how do you deal with that? Because, you know, obviously if you talk to someone who's a Bible scholar about the cursing of the fig tree, there's a pretty good reason. There's a good answer. But if kids don't know the cultural background, they don't understand Palestine, they don't understand fig trees, you know, because it's not part of our culture, you can see where they'd have all sorts of crazy answers and thoughts.
Yeah, that's a great question. I hear it a lot. It's also the thing that makes people afraid to do what I'm saying right now, because, so just hang with me here for a second. I've done all this study, and I have all this academic training. I've been studying the Bible since I was a teenager. I've written books. Why would I give over the discovery and pursuit of truth to a bunch of kids that are all over the board? You know, some of them are committed, some of them are not. Some have never cracked a Bible. We've had atheists and agnostics be a part of our group. One guy, an avowed atheist, who only came because he was interested in my daughter, and told my daughter ahead of time, I'm really good at fooling adults. So he made the mistake of telling my daughter that so that I would know it too. So he showed up, and 2 years later, he was being baptized in a lake. Nice. Because of my answer to your question. I have found the opposite. pooled ignorance. And the reason why is, let's say let's take that example of the withering of the fig tree. I don't just say, let's read this, and then what do you think? Why did Jesus wither the fig tree? We have a setup for that in some way. So we'll do something experience-based that that I'm just trying to think off the top of my head. I don't know what we did with that one in particular, but we do some kind of an experience to get them into the emotional space of, in this case, I mean, in Jesus's life, he's standing next to a fig tree that even though it's out of season, it should have figs on it because he is life itself and it won't produce figs. So we do some kind of an experience where, for instance, something that it might be an experience where you have lost your agency, or the thing that the crank doesn't work when you crank it, or something where they're experiencing something that is like what is happening in the story. So they're getting into the emotional thought space of what's happening in the story first, and then we might debrief that and talk about that. But then when we get to the story itself, in that case, I might say, so you're going to be in trios for this, and you get to use your phones in this pursuit. You'll have 20 minutes. Use your phones to look up anything you can find about fig trees in the Mediterranean. You can look up commentaries if you want to. You use any sources of information you want. And the question you're trying to answer as a trio is, why did Jesus curse the fig tree? And then come up with all the possible answers you think could answer that question. So that thing I just said there is a key. Often what we say is, what is the answer? And then everyone feels pressured, like, well, of course the leader knows what the answer is. So what he really wants me to do is say what he's already thinking. So when you say, come up with all the possible answers to this based on what you collect together as a group, and then after 20 minutes, we come back together and the trio reports back what they discovered. And then I interact with that and the group interacts with that as we go around that circle. So what happens is it's crowdsourcing pursuit informed by the kids who are doing what they do in school. So the other answer to that, Rick, for me is like, so high school and college students are like uncovering and discovering profound things at school. Their teachers expect a lot of them. Their teachers aren't saying, in my classroom, because I'm using the pursuit method, what is it called? Inquiry-based methodology. I'm not just pooling their ignorance. I'm collecting the energy and ability to discover truth in the room. And then I'm interacting with it. I'm not saying, as someone says, one of their answers to potentially why Jesus cursed the fig tree. I'm not saying, wrong. Here's the theologically correct answer. I'm listing everything and letting the group interact with it. And often someone will say, you know what you said though, that doesn't make sense. That if he's doing it because of that, that doesn't make sense to me. So the questions come up, and then my role in this environment is to throw in what they haven't and to interact with what they come up with. So I'm not abdicating my perspective and my own thought process about it. I'm just holding back so that they discover what they discover. And then I'm careful not to say, okay, now you've had your chance. Now I'll tell you the real answer. I never do that. I just throw in my perspective and interact with their perspective. And my perspective carries weight in the room, but so does everyone else's. So I've never really had a problem. I've never really felt like all we're doing right now is sharing our ignorance because of this. but it really does depend on the kind of questions you're asking. So I'll throw one thing in here that I train youth pastors in. In youth ministry and in adult ministry, the weakest area of ministry leadership is asking good questions, in my experience. We ask really terrible questions, questions that have an implied yes or no answer, questions that have an implied right answer, questions that don't cause anyone to think. Like if you ask a question and say, what did Jesus do to the fig tree in Matthew 11 or whatever? That is not unusual to hear a question like that in church. What did Jesus do to the fig tree in Matthew 11? Here's how kids and adults hear that question. Oh, you think I'm an idiot. And somebody, the one kid who wants to always, be the participator, says, oh, he cursed it. And then we think, oh, we had a good question. One of the kids answered it. It's a terrible thinking question because it demeans the intelligence of everyone in the room. So many of our questions are like that. So I train youth workers in how to ask why questions, questions that have the word why in them, especially as it concerns Jesus and the things that he does, because why gets at the heart. And it's the heart that captures you and keeps you captured. It's not your understanding that does that, because the disciples mostly didn't understand. And 11 of the 12 of them were martyred. That's how committed they were. They were overwhelmed and penetrated by and immersed in the heart of Jesus. So much so that Peter said, when Jesus said, are you guys going to leave too? In John 6, and Peter said, where else would we go? Like, only you have words of truth. Only you. So that's where I want young people and adults to get to, is that but through asking why questions over and over again, and as follow-up questions, often people will answer a question with a what answer. So if you ask, why did Jesus curse the fig tree? They'll say, well, because it didn't have fruit on it. That's a what answer. So I'll ask a follow-up question. Why would that matter to Jesus that it didn't have fruit on it? I don't know. Maybe it was supposed to have fruit on it. Yeah. No, we know it wasn't supposed to have fruit on it during that time. So why would Jesus still insist that it does? So why makes you think and dig and try to understand the heart of Jesus in whatever he's doing. So I ask a lot of why questions, almost exclusively. There's a place for what and how questions, but I
was going to ask you about the how questions, because how tends to be the application. What are you going to do with this? How will this impact your life? How will this change you?
Yeah. So I'm going to say something that is going to probably sound irritating or something else, but it's just what I believe and what I practice. The repeated phrase in ministry, apply this to your life. If you think about the last sermon you heard, your pastor probably gave you 3 or 4 new things that you were supposed to apply to your life this week. We mostly do 0 of those. Just as a general guess, we mostly do 0 of those apply to your life things that we just heard in the sermon. And if you think about 50-ish sermons a year, we got a lot of things we're supposed to be applying to our life, and we don't do really any of them, because that's actually not how Jesus made disciples. He didn't give people life application at the end of everything he said. So our philosophy and what I do is more botanical. It feeds off the botanical metaphors of Jesus. So if you graft something into the vine, then the dead branch gets the life of the vine going up through it. And then the branch suddenly starts to grow again, and the branch produces fruit, which in our world looks like applying it to your life. If you say fruit is the public evidence of something that's internally true, so now it's being publicly lived out, Jesus' way of doing that is to invest in the root, to get more life going through the root into the branch so that the branch naturally produces organic fruit. So we never talk about applying anything to your life, ever. Sometimes it drives my wife crazy because she, like many, would like, well, where's the practical application? What we're trying to do is invest in the life, the heart connection with Jesus, and then we see fruit coming out of that connection that spills into their everyday life. But we're not directing what that is.
I actually agree with that. And I think theologically, you can make an argument that it's the Holy Spirit's job to apply Scripture to our lives. Our job is, we're the midwives. We're the guides from the side, not the sage from the stage.
So if you say that, Rick, then the follow-up is, well, how do you know how the Spirit is guiding that? So then you necessarily have to give young people and adults experiences where they're depending on the Spirit, where they actually get to practice depending on the Spirit. So we do that sort of thing all the time. One of the themes in our group is childlike dependence on Jesus, which runs counter to our craving for control. So one of the simple things we do a lot that creates dependence is if you say to somebody, okay, I'm gonna put together random pairs, and I'd like you to pray for each other. What universally will happen in any Christian environment is the one person A will ask person B, oh, so what would you like me to pray for you? Person B will say, here's what I'm comfortable telling you about what to pray for me. Person A then prays, and they know that a longer prayer is a better performance than a short prayer. So they'll say a long prayer and feel like, if I can do that, then I've done something. In our group, when we pray, we say, what we're going to do here is very prescribed. The first thing we're going to do together, we're going to start this all together, is we're going to pause for at least 60 seconds, and we're all going to ask Jesus, what would you like me to pray for on behalf of my partner? And we're going to sit in silence. And I tell them, as something bubbles up in you, and we particularly don't ask, what do you need prayer for? So if something bubbles up in you, pray for that. When I say time's up, now you can pray, they pray for that. And I say, well, what happens if nothing bubbles up for you? Then just pray whatever you think, whatever comes to your mind, just pray that. It's not a performance thing. Then we'll do that and switch, and the other person will do it for the other person. But I lead into it by doing something very simple that has to do with authority and listening to the Spirit. I say, Jesus, we don't want to hear our own voice right now. We just want to hear yours. And we certainly don't want to hear the voice of the enemy. So we take authority over the enemy. You may not speak. That's it. Okay, Jesus, now we just want to hear your voice. So this is normalized with our kids, and they don't blink an eye at doing this now. And what happens,
culture,
right? What happens when you're prayed for in this way, and you've not told the person anything about your life or what you're concerned about, and they pray for something that you would never even have asked to pray for, but oh my gosh, what it says is, oh, Jesus is real. Jesus is real. The Spirit of Jesus is real. And I can learn how to be sensitive to that Spirit. And then I can risk out of that to say something to someone else. And we always say to people, if you're being prayed for and someone says something that just doesn't resonate with you, when you're done, just say thank you and move on. You're in charge of it. If it's not for you, it's not for you. So don't accept something just because someone's praying for you. But if they do pray for you, something that resonates with you, say so. Tell them the story of that, of whatever it is. So it's a very powerful thing to do, and we do it as a matter of course. It's one of the ways we try to train people into dependence. instead of control. Those are the two things that live in tension in our life: control and dependence. So to do your thing, Rick, you would need to help people have experiences and practice with what it looks like to develop an intimate, sensitive relationship with the Spirit, so that you can do what you're saying.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
And what I hear you saying, and what I love about this, and I'm sure these guys are getting all sorts of, they're wanting to jump in here and ask you questions. We want to do that in
Go
just
right ahead.
ask you questions. But what I hear you saying is something that we've hammered over and over again in these Zoom conversations, because it just keeps emerging, is there is a DNA, there's a culture to your group. And it really, if it's a very positive, attractive, dynamic DNA, like what you're describing, you know, kids are going to want to be part of that. Adults are going to want to be part of that. And you know, so that it really starts from the beginning, and you did that with this Jesus-centered type of group ministry that you do.
Yeah, and the DNA of our culture is I use a screen every time we meet. So to put our questions that we're pursuing up on, but also video that we watch together. And the first slide that they see whenever they come, and the last thing they see whenever they leave, is a artistic rendering of Jesus. And over the top of it, it says, "Pursuing the heart of Jesus, not his recipes."
Oh,
When we have visitors come in, I ask one of the kids, "Can you explain to them the crazy thing we have up on our screen here? What is pursuing the heart of Jesus, not his recipes?" And I ask the kid to explain what that means to the visitor. And it's usually, it's not how I would explain it. Almost never is it how I would explain it, but they usually get it pretty good.
Yeah.
In passing that on. And it becomes part of the culture then, that we are after his heart, not after his recipes for better living. That's what we're after. So that becomes the central orbital hub of our, it really helps too, because you know what you're going to go after and what you won't.
Right.
When I train youth pastors in this, one of the things they very often say to me is, "I can't believe how free I feel now, because now I know what I'm going after and what I'm not going after. And I'm always in tension about that. What do we do next? Now I have a focus that I do this, not that." And it gives them freedom.
Well, let's give some freedom to
Yeah.
class here. These guys. What do you want to ask, Rick? Go ahead, Trev.
Hey, I was wondering, do you think that type of ministry that you're doing through that, kind of the methodology and everything, is complementary to kind of like the postmodernism that that's kind of influencing culture and everything?
Yeah, let me, give me a second here to pull something up. Let me see if I can, yeah, here it is. Because that's a fascinating question. What is merging into where this generation is at, where the emerging generation is at? So here are characteristics of Gen Z, just macro characteristics of Gen Z. They're entrepreneurial by nature. They're insistent on hands-on participation. They're both the artist and the subject of the art, meaning they are creatives from the get-go. They like to participate in activism, not observe it. And they're micro interactors, and they crave authentic experiences, not scripted ones. They crave authentic experiences, not scripted ones. So if you think about that list I just read, the environment I'm trying to describe is exactly that. It would appeal to exactly that kind of person. So, and what happens generationally is the older generation almost reflexively looks down and says, "Oh, I see the problems with that. You know, oh man, that generation's got it wrong. There's something missing there." I look at that list, and more, I think this is a prophetic call to the church. The way these young people are wired is God's way, kind way of saying, look, I've planted my hunger in this generation, and it's a prophetic call to you, church. Are you going to listen? If you won't listen, the consequences are them leaving.
Yeah.
So when it gets painful enough, you'll probably listen. So I was on a jet coming back from England about 20 years ago, and they had been through what we're going through now, tremendous steep decline in the church, decimating church membership, and they were replanting something in the ashes of the forest fire that burned through the church in England. They're the most creative expressions of high engagement ministry I had seen. And I'm coming back on the plane, and I'm thinking of two things. One, wow, I got to participate in a church culture that was decimated, and now they got nothing to lose. So they're experimenting with new ways of engaging people that are like what I've just been describing. And I said, but God, they got there when the church burned down. And I started crying on the plane. I said, does it have to get to that with us? Because we're 20 years behind the church in England right now. We're mapping exactly to what happened to them. We're headed toward that. And I just, through my tears, said, does it have to get there? And he said, nope, but it's going to take courage. And I said, sign me up. That's what I said on the jet. Sign me up. If it's going to take courage, let's go. So so that's what I've been doing for 20 years, is to try to help seed some of this in the ministry world. And some people resonate with it, and some people, it's like I'm Charlie Brown's teacher. Wah, 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 wah. It's just background noise. But some people really resonate with it, and they capture it, and they change what they're doing, and they get to experience the delight of fruit happening in front of them. And by the way, I'll just throw this one more thing in, Trev. I know you didn't ask this, but in ministry, you often wonder, hey, did what I say go in? Did I make an impact? In the way we do that in the 20-minute talk scenario is you look for body language and are people nodding their heads and stuff like that. In this scenario, I am never in doubt of what people are learning, because they're the ones saying what they're learning. It's coming out of them. And then I'm interacting with it. So I have no doubt where everyone in the group is at, because they're giving feedback for what they're discovering. And when you're speaking out a discovery, you already owned it, or you couldn't speak it out. So I have the luxury of knowing the maturity level and the depth and everything about every person in our group. Because of that, I don't have to wonder. So anyway, great question.
Yeah, it is a great
Thank
question.
you.
And it's interesting. You kind of marked it around Gen Z there, but when you start looking at millennials, you see a lot of those same characteristics. And I would argue that if you really get honest with Gen X, we're also that way. We want more experiential. We see we're more entrepreneurial. I mean, it's very, very interesting to see that. And I wonder, these post 1960 generations, what I would term postmodern in their constructs, what they're rejecting is not Christianity. What they're rejecting is churchianity, the institution. And that's a big difference. And, I started an organization and started a life group myself this last year, Rick. I disassociated from my own church as a group guy, and went and started a group, for a life group for people who don't go to church, for people who struggle with church, people who just, it's a slow go. It's hard to plant those type of groups, because it's hard for people that, you said it early, they need safety, and their voice has to matter. And you think it's tough getting teenagers, try and get adults into that scenario.
Yeah, adults have to be recultured into what's expected of them, and they haven't had that expectation for a long time. But the other thing I'll say about this is when I say it's about courage. So listen, in my experience, the main thing that holds back from this kind of way of leadership from happening is the leader themselves. The leader is worried and afraid that if they plunge into this style, there'll be things that come up that they won't know how to answer. There'll be answers made that they don't like, and they won't know how to handle that with those people. And when you ask people to take on something hard, either plunge into an experience or into a conversation, there's that moment, I call it the speed bump, where everyone, including me, if I go to church and the pastor says from the front, in a moment, I'm going to have you turn to the person next to you and discuss blank. My knee-jerk reaction is, I don't want to do that. I want to just sit and listen. Everyone has that, by the way, that speed bump. The leader's responsibility is to not tolerate that. To say, oh, I get that you have some discomfort. Just wait. Do what I'm saying. Turn to your partner, discuss this. What happens is people get over the speed bump. Now they're talking to somebody and they really love that once they're doing it. Or they're doing an experience that they thought, you can't be serious, we're going to do that. And they get over the speed bump and they're in the experience, and then they love it. There's laughter, there's conversation. It's the speed bump that is the leader's job, to be patient and to not tolerate. We're going over the speed bump, gang. So Joni Schultz, my old boss, who I learned a lot from, one of the great things she taught me was that the leader's job is to believe that what you've just asked them to do, they will do. A lot of leaders will say something like, I know this is going to be uncomfortable for you, and I'm uncomfortable too myself, and if you don't want to do it, you don't have to, but, and what that communicates is you have no faith in what you're asking us to do. So Joni taught me, go all in. Just flat out expect them to do whatever you're going to do, and don't give up on that. And that helps the whole group get over the speed bump. It's a faith principle, actually. It means that, well, I'm risking, I'm saying yes to this. So that's one thing I learned from her that has come back to help me time and again, because I'm like everyone else. I don't like it when there's silence, and I don't like it when people are uncomfortable. My own daughters are in my group, and they're the most vocal about, Dad, you've got to be kidding. We're going to do that. And I have to talk to them afterwards. And girls, you recognize you're the only ones that say that. So be quiet. I know I'm your dad, and therefore you feel like you have the permission to say that in the group. You don't, because you're making my job harder. Right. Yes, I know it's hard, but no one else reacts like you do. So be quiet when I ask that. So anyway.
And I understand you've got another appointment here at the bottom of the hour, and we want to.
In about 5 or 6 minutes, yeah.
Yeah, so we want to honor that. But let's one more real quick question. Anybody got one? Take 2 minutes here. Yeah. Joseph.
So I love this, especially the dependence, the tension between dependence and control. And I wrote down a whole lot of notes, and I love this very much. So you talk about within your groups, there never being an application, but outside of your group, do you guys ever take the group and go and apply what you've been learning anywhere, like in an outreach, or does that make sense?
So one of the things my wife challenged me about recently with prayer, because we use prayer sort of ritualistically in groups. Let's open in prayer. Let's close in prayer. I try to upend our ruts around prayer. One way I do that is like in a prayer activity, I'll say, out of all that you've taken in tonight, what's one word of gratefulness you'd like to express to Jesus? Only one word. Don't say a sentence, one word. It's my way of upending the normal patterns of prayer. And so they have to think, what's my one word? So my wife challenged me, though, the last month. She said, we don't have ever any like conversational times of prayer where we're asking kids to say whatever they want. You're directing them to use one word, but what if we said, say whatever you want? That was a good word. And so 2 Tuesdays ago, we had a circle at the end, and I did that. And so the practical expression apply to your life thing that you're asking there, Joseph, is now I'm asking them to do what a lot of kids don't do these days: pray out loud in a narrative way. So that's what we did. And sometimes I will say, like I did this Tuesday, I asked somebody, will you pray on behalf of the group for what's just come up? So practical things do come up as part of the normal conversation. Like, what would you do in this situation? Practical examples and examples from their life do come up into the conversation. But just to be clear about what I'm saying, we take advantage of those moments when the practical things bubble into the conversation. But I'm not saying the goal is progression toward, now we've discovered what the scripture says. Here's 3 things that you need to apply to your life. The life apply things come up in the conversation instead. And then what happens after we meet is, in our group at least, that we say, you guys can stay as long as you want. I'm going to bed, but you can stay as long as you want. And we have kids stay from our group, usually is, believe it or not, 2 hours long. And they stay for another hour, an hour and a half after that. And they just talk. Some of it's teenager talk, and some of it's whatever happened that night and what it spurred in them to talk about in their experience. And after this kind of high intensity engagement, because I'm a natural introvert, I have been hugely intentionally engaged in this conversation for a long time. So I help clean up. I engage a little bit with them afterwards, and then I go off and I have a glass of wine and I play solitaire for about a half an hour. I just decompress.
Yeah.
My wife, however, stays, she's an extrovert. She stays with those kids and she engages them in just their life and what happened that night. And that's what happens afterwards. So a lot of the, how does this apply, happens when it bubbles up in the group, and then after the group, when it has raised things that maybe, like we did one night where it was around MLK Day, and we were exploring, we were comparing something Martin Luther King said to something Jesus said. And it created, because our group is a mixed group of people on extremes, it created a lot of tension in the group, and a lot of political stuff bubbled to the surface, and we don't intentionally focus on that. But it created a natural conversation around this that spilled over past the group. What you have there is then kids wrestling with Jesus over their parents' strongly held political beliefs. They're feeling challenged by the example of Jesus over what their family believes. And so they're trying to work this out with each other, and the way kids do. So that's how it kind of surfaces and bubbles up. But we are going in a month to serve as a group at Camp Barnabas in Missouri, which is a camp for special needs kids and adults. And many of our group have been serving there for many years, and my own daughters have been serving there. One of my oldest daughter has spent whole summers serving there. She's amazing. This is the hardest service experience I've ever seen in my 30 plus years of youth ministry. You're assigned to a special needs person for 23 hours a day. And it is exhausting and exhilarating at the same time. So this experience has been life-changing for our kids, because they're living out everything they're learning about the heart of Jesus and depending on him, and in an impossible situation. And then they get to live out everything they've been experiencing. So we know, ministry people know, that retreats and trips are huge catalysts for growth. They're not mountaintop experiences. People point back to a retreat or a camp or a trip they took years later and say, well, that's when this happened for me. So we know that those immersive experiences are ways to help people live out what they're learning. But my mission is to help them live out the heart-based relationship that has grown with Jesus, not their head-based knowledge of Scripture. We want to give them opportunities to live dependently in some kind of experience where they're out of their element and they actually have to depend on Jesus, and then they learn what that feels like. So,
Wow. Wow. And we're not just out of our element here, we're out of our time as
Yeah.
well. And man, I almost wish we had another half hour here just to keep
Wow.
going and talk with you more. But I got to tell you,
Yes.
for me, a lot of your ideas, a lot of your stuff that you've created, is it available for purchase, or can you find, I mean, and did you use fig Newtons when you talked about Jesus and the fig tree? Was that the snack that night? You know,
I don't remember. Yeah, we're a popcorn and brownie group.
there
We
you
have
go.
popcorn and brownies every time we meet. So some of what I'm talking about is embedded in groups curriculum called Live. I'm not sure if any of you youth ministry people have ever used Live. It's the most popular small group curriculum in the world. It's called Live, L-I-V-E. It is an inquiry-based system, so it's all question-based. That has a lot of this embedded in it, but it doesn't have really the experiential part that I'm talking about. I am right now with Vibrant Faith taking of the over 200 of these experiences I've created for our group now. I'm taking about 140 of them, and I'm editing them into a form that anyone can lead. And later this year, we'll release that, and it'll be called In Pursuit of Jesus. So we'll be releasing that probably in July, and it will be a 4-year scope and sequence curriculum, or you can buy one-off segments. So that 4 years is made up of series, and we'll also have individual series that you can buy, but the whole 4-year experience will be able to be bought. And it includes a leader guide PowerPoint file with embedded video and any kind of student handout that I give. I always give a handout so that they can reference something quickly and see the questions again. So it includes all those things. And it's all of these things that I've been doing to try to push the envelope and all this. So that'll be available in July. It'll be called In Pursuit of Jesus.
Great. What's the website for Vibrant Faith?
It's vibrantfaith.org.
Vibrantfaith.org.
And if you go there, today it's a crappy website. In 2 weeks, it'll be this beautiful new website that we've been working on re-releasing for 4 months now. So yeah, so it's about to launch. Our new website's about to launch, but it's called vibrantfaith.org.
All right.
So,
thank you, Rick. It's been a wonderful treat to have you here.
thank you all.
Conversation, and
Thank you.
you guys, we'll see you next week, or we won't see you next week. This is the last week for these Zoom conversations, but you be blessed and have a great weekend.
See you, everybody.
Thank you, sir.
Bye-bye.